Well, I'll introduce myself first while we're waiting for the other mics. My name is Craig Warmke. I'm a fellow with the Bitcoin Policy Institute. I also happen to be an academic philosopher, and I teach at Northern Illinois University.
My name's Angelo Morgan-Somers. I have a particular connection to this topic of discussion because, fun fact about me, I left school when I was 12, found Bitcoin when I was 13, and based my curriculum around that. So I'm really excited to hear what these two have to say about how to learn like a Bitcoiner.
I'm Remy van der Nagel. I work for Bitfavo, the largest cryptocurrency exchange of the Netherlands. Over there I am a cryptocurrency blockchain specialist, and I, among other things, have the privilege to educate our workforce about anything Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto trading.
Cool. So I guess we'll just get into it by asking, I guess, quite a fundamental question. How has Bitcoin changed, and this is for both of you, how has Bitcoin changed the way that you learn?
Well, quite a lot, actually. I think you come from this environment where you learn from, well, it's like institutionalized education or trusted sources, trusted research. And in Bitcoin, all of that wasn't really around. So the first thing you start to do is a Google search. You end up in these Telegram groups, Reddit. So I guess it turns into more of social learning. So for me, at least, the main ways I started learning was from conversations, podcasts, communities, forums. I think a lot of you can recognize that. Also, I would say I started learning way more by doing. I think the most effective way to learn about Bitcoin is to just use the software, run your own node, etc., etc. And then I guess the final way in how it changed the way I learn is when you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you have to start thinking about money. And when you start thinking about money, you start thinking about various macroeconomic events. So you will get deeper and deeper into the dynamics of the world. And to connect all those dots, I think it's very natural that I shifted my thinking more from an analog way to more of a first principles approach. You have to rethink quite possibly everything you know as to form constructive opinions or thoughts about Bitcoin. And then, of course, when you start to do that, your source selection becomes even more important than normally. Normally, you rely on institutions to like, oh, these are trusted sources. In Bitcoin, I cannot open a newspaper and just trust that they write exactly how it works and that they understand it, because it's quite new. So there's so much information out there, but who do I trust? And ideally, Bitcoin, blockchain is about not having to trust. So you have to improve your source selection. So those are a few of the ways it changed my learning, I think.
And Craig?
Yeah, building off what Remy said, I think the biggest difference between learning as an academic versus learning as a Bitcoiner, you can boil down to the scope of learning and then the sources of learning. So in academia, you have these siloed hyper specialists. And so you tackle a very narrow set of questions, and everyone tackles their own, and there's not much transmission between silos. And also, for an academic, the sources of material are reputable academic presses and refereed journal articles. And in Bitcoin obliterates this kind of model, because not only is Bitcoin expansive and interdisciplinary, so it requires and forces you and pulls you out of the silos to communicate with economists and computer science and people in industry, but it also moves very fast. And so, I can't just rely on other journal articles or academic refereed books, because they come out too slowly. And often, sadly, they're not very reliable. And so often when I'm citing things in my academic work, I have to cite, an interview with Troy Cross on a podcast, or a blog post by Nick Carter, or a tweet by some pseudonymous cartoon laser-eyed pirate or something. And an editor might say, what is this? Well, it's the best. It's the best stuff. It's the newest stuff. And this is a way in which being a Bitcoiner and learning as a Bitcoiner obliterates the kind of traditional model for learning.
Yeah, and I think also there's a big shift in the way that you're learning when you're being pushed in to learn about something, which maybe, for instance, when you're learning about the what, or when you're being pulled into it. I mean, people say you fall down the rabbit hole, don't you? There's the sense of losing control, or there's other forces that are pulling you further and further to go deeper and deeper. And, you know, you learn about one concept, and there's elements you don't understand, and you go further into the next, and it just, each question answered asks another 6 questions. So how would you say or what would you say the difference is between learning about the what, the actual content, versus learning the why, the context?
Yeah, so as an educator, I would say it's always really important to start with the why. I'm starting to sound like Simon Sinek over here, but so especially in a complex technology, which it is, as Bitcoin, that effectively introduces a paradigm shift, potentially. You cannot just start describing, here's this database, we decentralize it, it's slower, it's more inefficient, but you can do stuff decentralized, and people will just look at you, okay, well, why do I need that in my life? And potentially it's a revolutionary technology, so you have to start with introducing people, reminding them that it doesn't have to be this way. So you have to start with the use cases. What are the problems in the world? Or maybe not problems, but what is the things we can improve? And then once you explain the why, it will always, then the what follows logically. So, I mean, it's true for any subject, but especially in Bitcoin, because it's so complex and it can mean so much, potentially.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly right. I think this is indicative of what's wrong with many of the op-eds and things that we see, like through the New York Times, where you'll see someone like Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist who's very smart. He has all the credentials, but he thinks that Bitcoin is an inefficient, energy-intensive database. And that's true if you don't recognize why these design choices were made in the first place, which is to optimize for censorship resistance. And I think once you realize the why behind some of these design choices, then the what of Bitcoin becomes more clear.
Yeah, so I think it's just for all of us, if you ever find yourself trying to educate somebody else on Bitcoin, just remember, just really start with the use cases, start with the why, actually start with what is money. Because if you don't understand the problem or the potential problems, why would anybody care about the solution? So,
pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. And on that point as well of educating other people, like there are a lot of people that need help when it comes to understanding more about Bitcoin, but for a lot of us it's a lonely road to going from 0 to 100 in terms of the complexity of your Bitcoin understanding. So what would you say the role of or the importance of self-education is in something like Bitcoin?
Well, I think the best way to learn about Bitcoin by yourself is to use it. Experiential knowledge is the most important in this way. But beyond this first-hand experience, which you can only get by definition from using Bitcoin yourself firsthand, I do think that there's a serious danger in relying too much on our own cognitive faculties and not relying on others. We're social creatures. We have to learn in communities, even if it's through print. And I think the best thing that you can do to learn about what's happening in the Bitcoin world is to find a community of people whose judgments that you trust and that can guide you to reliable Bitcoin information.
Yeah, exactly. And with the technology that decentralizes it, ultimately puts more responsibility into your hands. But the only way to be more confident with that responsibility is to educate yourself better. So in that sense, I often hear people coming up to me, yeah, but can I really trust myself with the private keys? Well, can you? I mean, not if you never read anything by yourself. And so self-education is super important in that way. Also, because we don't have these trusted educational institutions, you will have to do it. So you will have to do your own research. I mean, it's the most used phrase probably in Bitcoin and blockchain land. Do your own research.
Yeah, for sure. And when you're doing your own research, this is, I guess, the pros and cons to everything, right? Doing your own research is incredibly important for the reasons that you just discussed, but I guess there's some shortcomings as well of it, as there is trade-offs in everything. What would you say the importance of don't trust, verify is when you're going about a self-education journey in Bitcoin?
Yeah, so it's a very good point. There are limitations to do your own research. If you're not able to do that research, it's almost like the way you approach a human being. Do you have an optimistic view, and do you think, hey, anybody that does their own research can reach the right conclusions, or can educate themselves and lift themselves out of whatever situation it is? Or do you think, like, many people are perhaps not able to make the distinction between a great source or a bad source? So it's also touching upon the human view that you have. But yeah, it is, as I said earlier, it's like really important to verify your information, because there's so much out there, and because Bitcoin has also been used to speculate, so there are ulterior motives for people spreading information about Bitcoin out there. So really try to do some peer reviewing yourself, or listen to, as you said, listen to people that you think you can trust. Ideally, we eliminate the trust, but I think it's never 100% possible.
Greg?
Yeah, and I think especially for newcomers to the cryptocurrency space, I think there's often the temptation to get pulled in to altcoins with more handsome founders, with more charismatic founders, with promises about more privacy, faster blocks, and so on. And I think it's important to recognize that, I mean, on the one hand, I do think that there's real innovation in other crypto assets and other cryptocurrency networks. That's true. But the reality is, in my humble opinion, that somewhere between 95 to 99% of the projects are, if not vaporware or outright scams, then projects which won't last in the long run, even if the founders are honest and genuine and authentic. And so I think it's important to realize, especially when we're buffeted with marketing from these altcoin projects, that even though every depth has a surface, not every surface has a depth. So Bitcoin has a depth and a surface. It can pull us in through greed. It can pull us in through the real humanitarian benefits it can bring to the globe. But many other projects make promises which won't be kept. And those are the surfaces that we see through these marketing campaigns which don't have a depth.
I think that's the nature of the beast as well, when Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that doesn't have a marketing department. You fall into a situation where, you know, the educational materials that you might come across for many crypto projects are actually just purely marketing materials disguised as educational materials.
Right.
And when you don't know much about the actual under the hood of the entire system, it can be hard to distinguish between the two, and you can get caught up in these white papers which are selling you something, but you think they're teaching you something. And it can be hard to tell the difference. And I guess that's one of many reasons why lots of people end up learning false things about Bitcoin. So why does this happen so often? What is the, I guess you could say, the biggest catalyst of misinformation in Bitcoin, and what can we do to prevent against it or fix it?
Sure. Mind if I take this one?
Yeah, go.
So there's misinformation from altcoin marketing campaigns, but there's also misinformation that comes through what I think of as a misinformation pipeline. And it doesn't always go in this order, but this is often how it works. So you have university professors with good credentials, and they publish something that's false about Bitcoin. And often the titles of these papers or op-eds are flashy, and it catches the attention of journalists. Journalists pick it up, simplify, and run with it. And then that makes its way to the desk of policymakers. And so the misinformation pipeline is from the institutions of higher ed through our legacy media and journalistic outlets, and then in through our government agencies and policymakers. I think this is probably, I mean, sometimes it loops around, you know. Sometimes journalists start with it and it feeds back in, or sometimes you'll have someone like Alex DeVries, who is like a misinformation artist, who will do the op-ed, cite himself through an academic article that's non-peer-reviewed, and then it eventually appears in some sort of white paper from the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy. And so I think what we need is another pipeline to combat this more well-known misinformation pipeline.
Just agree?
Agreed.
Agree. Awesome. So that's some of the things that you can get wrong about Bitcoin when you're learning, and you know, there's, as you just said there, there's a few reasons why people get a lot of things wrong, but people get a lot of things right as well. And of those things that you'd say you can be pretty confident in your conceptualization of in Bitcoin, what would you say is the most important thing? Of all of the things that you've learned, what's the most important discovery or thing that you've learned in Bitcoin?
Yeah, so in many ways, this panel is a lot of fun for me to do because it takes me back to that moment when I first learned about Bitcoin blockchain, which was just a magical learning journey. And it's hard to put into words like what's the most important thing I've learned, because I've learned so much. So basically, I learned that I don't know all that much, that I actually know very little. And then you start to dive into Bitcoin, you get into the macroeconomics, you get into the dynamics of the world, and you just endless information and endless things to learn, which makes this space so exciting for me. And it certainly sparked in me sort of a learning revolution. I think I went through the traditional educational institutions. I mean, disillusioned is a bit of a big word, but I didn't experience all that much joy in learning anymore. And certainly, Bitcoin brought that back for me. So, apart from learning that I don't know all that much, I think I also learned that most people, it's very hard for most people to get out of their own framework of the world of thinking. They think they know how it works, it feels safe to them, and then as soon as you have ideas that are outside of that framework, or that you propose that something might be different as the way they see it, it's very hard for people to break out of their own framework, the box they created, to make sense out of the world. That also translates into that fundamentally there's still a lot of tribalism going on in humans, I think. We experience it with Bitcoin all the time. You're either for or against. It's either useless or it's everything. And so I learned, for me personally, myself at least, that I think almost everything is gray. It's always somewhere in the middle. You have to get the best out of it, and you also have to look critically at what might not be all that great about your own beliefs and about the things you learn. So that's for me the biggest things, I guess.
Yeah, and so just to summarize Remy's point, which is true for me also, the biggest thing I've learned is how to be humble, because more than ever, the people that I interact with, because I'm interacting with people from Bitcoin, I'm not the smartest person in the room. In fact, that's probably the opposite. And you know, this does wonders for what you can learn, because then you realize, oh, you know, there's a bunch of people who know a lot more about a bunch of different stuff than I do, like the developers, the economists, you know, the people in industry who often have practical and pragmatic knowledge that you can often only get by talking to them. Yeah.
Cool. And I guess another question that would be sort of, I think is important to ask in any niche, but especially in Bitcoin, because we have been known to be quite a hard-headed group. We can be quite confident in many of our predictions about the future and our conceptualizations of the current system. But what are some mistakes that we might be making, and how could we rectify them?
I think it's easy to fall prey to this kind of recipe. So we're early with Bitcoin, and we've been early, and we got a win under our belt against what you might think of as the elites. So it's Bitcoiners versus the world, and we won. And in order to have been early in Bitcoin, you've had to have some openness to new ideas and a healthy cynicism for some legacy institutions. And once you have a kind of overconfidence and the cynicism and the openness, this can breed conspiratorial thinking. And you know, sadly, you can think that you're more often right than the people who have the very expertise that have more justification to issue judgments in the things that you think they're wrong about.
I totally agree with that. I think in this journey of learning, self-study, taking a critical approach at the current foundations of the world, you can absolutely fall prey to start believing too much in your own medicine, or to get lost in a tunnel vision in your train of thought. I think one of the most dangerous things that I've seen in Bitcoin is actually that we have to prevent it from behaving like a cult. Bitcoin movement had to defend itself so much against attacks by various institutions. It was only used for criminals, etc., etc. So it's natural that you start defending yourself, and you do a lot of research, and now you think you know, and you know something that the rest don't. But again, stuff is gray. We have to prevent that this turns into some sort of a religion too. Although it certainly, I mean, it's a great religion. But be open to criticism. Keep on having those conversations, even though you block them out, because there's so much rubbish out there, so much new crypto projects coming up that are all scams, so many attacks on you. But still, try to summon the energy to have those conversations, to educate people also. I think that's the thing that works, and to be open to criticism, and to look forward at what we can improve in the Bitcoin community.
For sure, it's quite easy for Bitcoiners to be very right about a lot of things and then think that that can transpose onto other topics and become quite hard-headed in that sense. But I guess one last question then to wrap this up. If you were to wake up tomorrow and you'd forgotten everything that you'd learned about Bitcoin, and you had to start completely from scratch with learning, where would you start?
Do you want to start?
Sure. I would hopefully start with the book I'm about to complete. It's called Resistance Money, and it will be out next summer through an academic press, and it's a case for Bitcoin. But I would also probably consult with these guys. I think you guys have educational materials too.
Yeah, I got a book called Do Bitcoin, which is sort of aimed at if you don't have any experience with even computers. So it's a book for your grandma about Bitcoin, basically. There's a section in it where I explain how Bitcoin works without mentioning the word Bitcoin or mining or blockchain or anything like that. So I think if you're really starting from scratch, that's probably a good place as well. Self-shill, I know, but it's got to be done. What about Remy?
Oh, since we're plugging, then you might also at Favo and experience me and get some free courses and have conversations with your colleagues. But on a serious note, I would put even more effort into understanding what money is. It became super obvious when I teach that almost none of us, or maybe not us, but the people know what money is and how it behaves. And only when you understand its problems or potential problems, you can more effectively put your energy into learning about Bitcoin and blockchain technologies. So I would put a lot of effort into that. Apart from that, join a community. And there's a great documentary on YouTube, sort of entertaining. It's 1 hour. It's by Thorsten Hoff, The End of Money as We Know It, I think. It's from 2015. It's a bit dated, but it's a fun way, an hour, entertaining way to start. So if you have to recommend something to anybody, maybe recommend that documentary.
Well, it's been incredibly enlightening, both incredible answers throughout. But yeah, that's just about it. So thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.